If season one of the EdTech Curio cabinet explored enduring patterns of teaching and learning, season two turns our attention to something a little different. Not just new tools, but what happens when those tools begin to reshape how learning itself is organized. Over the past few years, education has entered a new technological moment. Artificial intelligence is moving rapidly from research labs into everyday tools. Universities are reconsidering how credentials work, and the boundaries between teaching, assessment, and learning support are beginning to blur. At first glance, these developments can feel transformative, as though education is on the edge of some rapid change. But if season one taught us anything, it's this: education rarely transforms overnight. Instead, new technologies interact with long standing learning practices in ways that are often very subtle and sometimes unexpected. Some ideas flourish, and some fail quietly. And occasionally, something deeper shifts. Not just what we use, but how learning is structured and who shapes it. In season two, we'll explore curiosities that sit at the intersection between emerging technology and enduring educational patterns. We'll ask questions like, what actually happens when AI becomes part of the learning process? Why do institutions struggle to evolve credential systems? What does academic integrity mean when answers can be generated instantly? How do feedback, personalization, and learning environments change when systems begin to respond dynamically? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when the instructor is no longer the only source of knowledge? Because across all of these questions, a larger theme begins to emerge. Learning is becoming more distributed, more connected, and in many ways, more complex. As always, we'll explore these curiosities through four lenses: the artifact, the technology or trend we're examining, the pattern, where we've seen something similar before, the paradox, that unexpected insight hiding inside the story, and the signal, a clue about where learning might be headed next. So let's open the cabinet again. For centuries, one of the most effective forms of learning has been tutoring, a knowledgeable guide working closely with a student. They explain ideas, asking questions, adjusting instruction in real time. Now, unfortunately, tutoring has been difficult to scale. It requires time, expertise, and individual attention. But now something new has entered the educational landscape: artificial intelligence systems that can answer questions, explain concepts, and guide learners through problems. In other words, machines that behave a little bit more like tutors, which raises an interesting question. What happens when the tutor is no longer a person? Welcome back to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. Hello again. I'm Christina, a Curio steward. And in this podcast, we explore curiosities in education through four lenses: the artifact, the technology or practice we're examining; the pattern, where we've seen something similar before; the paradox, the unexpected insight hiding inside the story; and the signal, what it might tell us about the future of learning. Today's artifact is one of the most talked about technologies in modern education: AI tutoring systems. Tools capable of explaining concepts, answering questions, and guiding students through problems. But to understand what these systems might mean for learning, it helps to take a step back and look at a much older idea: tutoring itself. Modern AI systems can now perform tasks that once required human tutors. They can explain complex ideas, they can generate examples on the fly, walk through solutions step by step, provide immediate feedback, and adapt all their responses based on what the student's questions are at that time. For learners studying independently, these tools can feel remarkably helpful. A student that's stuck on a calculus problem can ask for clarification. A learner reviewing physics concepts can request some type of an alternative explanation. And unlike a human tutor, these systems are available at any time. In theory, they could democratize access to personalized learning support, but history suggests that the story might be a little bit more complicated than that. The idea of automated tutoring is not new. Researchers began experimenting with intelligent tutoring systems in the 1970s. Early systems attempted to simulate expert instructors by guiding students through structured problem-solving processes. Some of these systems worked surprisingly well. Students using them sometimes performed as well as those receiving traditional tutoring, but they were expensive to build and very difficult to scale. Modern AI systems change that equation. Instead of designing tutoring logic manually, large language models can generate explanations dynamically, which dramatically lowers the barrier to creating tutoring like experiences. What makes this moment particularly interesting is that we've seen something similar before. In season one, we explored a curio called The Lecture That Refuses to Die. For more than a century, new technologies have promised to replace lectures. Film, television, online learning, MOOCs, each innovation was expected to finally make the lecture obsolete. And yet, lectures persisted, not because universities resist change, but because lectures serve a deeper function. They help organize information, they help organize knowledge, they provide intellectual structure, they model how experts think. And something similar may be happening with AI tutors. These tools may feel revolutionary, but they are entering a learning ecosystem that already contains established practices. So instead of replacing instructors, AI may simply become another layer of support around that learning process. Just as slides, simulations, and digital courseware became companions to lectures rather than replacements. Which brings us to the paradox. AI tutors can explain almost anything, but explanation alone doesn't guarantee learning. One of the most consistent findings from cognitive science is that students often feel they understand something before they actually do. Clear explanations can create a sense of familiarity, but the true mastery requires practice, requires retrieval of those concepts, requires experimentation. In other words, learning involves more than just hearing the right answer. It requires engagement with the problem itself, which means AI tutors can be incredibly helpful, but only if they support active thinking rather than replacing it. The most promising future for AI tutoring may not be fully automated instruction. Instead, AI may become a learning companion, helping students clarify ideas, explore examples, receive hints rather than complete solutions, encourage persistence when problems become difficult. When designed thoughtfully, AI systems could support the kinds of productive struggle that learning science tells us are essential. In this sense, AI tutors may become less like answer machines and more like intellectual partners in the learning process. Every generation of education technology promises greater personalization, and AI may finally bring that promise closer to reality. But as always, the real question is not simply what technology can do, it's how technology interacts with the deeper patterns of learning. And those patterns remind us that guidance is valuable, but thinking must also still belong to the learner. Education technology evolves quickly, but the patterns of learning change very slowly. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet.